There are many magic items in this world, and none of them should be used lightly.
So we're going to talk about how to award magic items in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Greetings, adventurers. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes.
Today we're taking a look at awarding magic items in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Now, magical items such as weapons, armor, scrolls, potions, and staves are an iconic part of the Dungeons & Dragons experience. They're important to characters, and they can really be an important part of the story and the secrets of your campaign worlds.
So many of our favorite stories include magic items, like the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda, Thor's Hammer, the Elder Wand from Harry Potter, or the One Ring from Lord of the Rings.
Exactly, and these magical items, not only do they play a role in your story, but they're also an important part of your character's powers and abilities.
Adventurers love getting magic items. They love looting dragon hordes and finding these rare and unique and interesting items.
Yeah, because they love the powers that they give their characters. And the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules are really open-ended about how often you can award magic items. You can have a world where magic is very scarce, or a world like Eberron, where magical items are bought and sold and the figure into international politics.
Now, the guides in the Dungeon Master Guide are a little unclear on how to award magic items.
Yeah, most of the Dungeon Master's Guide concerns a bunch of random tables and treasure hoards that you can roll on to give out treasure, but they don't really tell you how magic items make your characters more powerful, or necessarily make it clear about how to make this a special moment in your campaign and really tie it into the storyline. Many of you have asked us how we handle these things in our own campaigns. And so today we're going to look at how to make awarding magic items a really special moment, but then we're also going to break down a couple strategies that you can use to determine how many magic items you should give out to your players as a dungeon master so that you get the right balance for the tone of the campaign you want to set.
So, let's get rolling.
Now, no matter how often you decide to award a magic item to your players, it should always come on the heels of a very special moment in your campaign, and in itself, it needs to be a memorable occasion.
Yeah, you might get a magic item as a reward for completing a difficult task or a major story moment in the campaign.
Yeah, your players could find it in the depths of a dusty tomb at the end of a long dungeon crawl.
Or they might pry it from the cold, dead fingers of an enemy.
They might sneak in and steal it from a dragon's horde.
Or they might get it as a noble reward for saving a city or town.
Now, no matter what, you still want to spend the time to make that magic item more than just a +1 sword or boots of striding and springing by giving it a really unique description.
Yeah, there's nothing more boring than just being told, hey, here's a +1 sword, it's whatever.
But on the other hand, if your players find Glimmer, a mirror-bladed longsword that shines with the light of the stars and has the runes which mark it as created by the ancient elven sages of Silvery Moon, and when they hold it in their hands and a werewolf is nearby, it makes all their hair stand on end, well, that's a cool item, even if mechanically it doesn't necessarily make their character that much more powerful.
Yeah, you can take, instead of homebrewing your own item, you can take an existing item and just add some quirks or flavor text to it to make it something more unique and interesting.
Yeah, and the tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide actually do a really good job of helping you figure out, like, the origin of the magic item, who made it, and what kind of minor properties or descriptive elements that it might have. It really only takes 1 or 2 lines of description to make that magic item way cooler than just, here is a +1 sword.
Another really cool thing that you can do is introduce intelligent magic items, which can act as an extra NPC and something that's going to be really memorable for the players.
Yeah, making a magic item intelligent doesn't necessarily need to increase its direct power, but it's more like introducing this additional character that your players can interact with. And this is a great way to give a magic item a history and personality, because it will talk to your players about its previous wielders. It might have weird insight into the situation at hand, or even have its own goals and ulterior motives that it tries to drive the players on. I love giving out these magic item cards to my players. They're a really great way to help players keep track of the properties of their magic items, because you can give like a page reference or notes on them. And one of the cool things about them is that they're super DIY. I have some of these ones that were made by Paizo for Pathfinder, and you can get a pack of them. They're like 50 cards for about $10. But there's all these great community creators online, and we'll include some links to where you can find these, of magic item cards that have great art. You can print them out on photo paper. And some of them even have the rules text for the ones that are in the open version of the rules on them too. And you guys just love these.
Yeah,
they're great.
You know, it feels really great, like being told that you're getting a magic item, writing it on your character sheet, that's great. But when you have a card that has like a really cool picture of that magic item, it kind of just reminds you every time you look down and see that, hey, I have this really awesome thing and I got to remember how it works, when to use it, and how cool I look when I'm using it.
Yeah, it's especially helpful because unlike spells and character abilities, which players can reference these in the player's handbook, if your players don't own a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide, they might have a hard time remembering the rules of their magic items, especially the more complex ones. So giving a handout of some kind is really, really useful in this regard, and we highly recommend it whenever you do award a magic item. I even do it for consumable items because I find that players often have a really hard time remembering how many potions and scrolls they have. So even giving out a card that is a potion is being like, I'm using this potion of invulnerability now, and then they hand it back to me, and that marks that occasion. And I think it's really good for if you have players that are bad at hoarding their consumable items and they never use them. Before we get into actually how often to award a magic item, there's a couple categorizations that the 5th edition rules use for sorting magic items, and one other technique that we like to use when we're thinking about magic items. Now, of course, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, the magic items are outlined by rarity. These rarities being...
There's common, uncommon, rare,
very rare,
and legendary. Yeah.
Right? But even within these rarities, there's a great deal of variance within the power of individual magic items. So I also like to say that even within the item rarity, there's really what we would consider to be minor magic items, major magic items, and game-changing magic items. And it's important to keep all of these things in mind when you are giving magic items out to your players, because this is an indication of approximately how powerful and impactful that item is going to be on your game. If you introduce an item that is far too powerful for your player characters, you might be dealing with the repercussions of that for the rest of the campaign.
Yes. Let's start with the common magic items, which I will also say, if you have Xanathar's Guide to Everything, introduced a whole number of common magic items that can be used in your campaign.
Yeah. In the core rules, the only common magic items are potions and scrolls. But Xanathar's Guide to Everything introduced some fun magic items that really have no practical effects, but are things like the helm that makes your eyes glow red.
Yeah, or the Wand of Smiles.
Yes. Yeah.
I love these magic items because they're the kind of thing that if you get as a player, they don't really change the game, but they're really fun. And if you can think of a creative way to use them, you can have a blast with them.
Yeah. The next category is uncommon magic items. And these include magic items like a +1 sword, slippers of spider climbing, javelin of lightning. These are items that they usually have a small boost to the player's power, but they're very rarely something that you have to be worried about how much power they're going to get. So they're great rewards for even the lowest level characters.
Yeah, and that we usually find these in tier 1 of play. Yeah. The next rarity for magic items is rare. And rare items include things like the Sunblade, the Wand of Fireballs, and Magic Armor. Mm-hmm. These are pretty powerful items. They can change a lot of aspects about what your character can do, and you usually find them in Tier 2 of playing.
The next rarity are the very rare magic items, and these ones are character-defining items that you often don't see until higher level play, usually over 10th level. These items include things like the Staff of Power, or +3 weapons, and very powerful magic armor like Dwarven Plate. Because these items are so character defining, they often include items which will really, really amp up the power of characters.
The next rarity is legendary magic items, and these ones are definite game changers, and you probably won't find them until near the end of the campaign, and they're going to really, really add a lot of power to your party.
Yeah.
These
These ones rock your world.
Yeah, I find that these are something that you get when you're like on your way to the final boss or something like that.
These include things like the Vorpal Sword and the Holy Avenger, or the robes of the Archmage, or if you want to talk a complete game changer, the Luck Blade, which gives wishes.
Yeah.
Right? With legendary magic items, you really want to save them for those amazing story moments as you approach the climax moments of your campaigns. Introducing them in mundane situations is such a game-changing factor that it will warp what your characters are capable of.
So let's talk about some of the magic items that actually change the whole game world for us.
Yeah, so Xanathar's Guide to Everything introduced this idea of minor items and major items. And actually the tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide are categorized in this way, but the book doesn't tell you that. And so magic items tables A through E are all minor items, and the other tables are all major items. Within this, we're kind of adding our category of the game-changing items, just so that you can be aware that they exist, and we'll talk about what a few of them are.
One of the biggest game changers that you can put into your game with a magic item is the ability to fly.
Or become invisible, or teleport over vast distances. You want to be really, really careful when awarding these magic items because they will vastly alter the capabilities of your players. So save them for those moments when your world and your storyline is upping the ante.
Yeah, you don't want to give these out too early, and especially if your campaign isn't ready for the ability to solve puzzles simply by flying over them or teleporting away.
At the same time, when you look at, aside from the game-changing items, major magic items typically directly boost player character power. And so this means that it's taking something that a character is already good at and making them better at it, like giving the fighter a magic weapon, or giving the wizard something that lets them cast more spells, such as a wand of fireballs or a staff of power. The minor magic items typically are situational or niche. And so when you're looking at the items that you're giving out to your players, if this is an item that's going to come into play in numerous combat encounters, you can see them using it every session, it's probably a major item or a game-changing item. And you need to think very carefully about putting that in the treasure that they find. With minor items, if you're like, well, it's cute, but it doesn't really do that much, you don't have to necessarily be as cautious.
Yeah, one of the really cool things that you can do with magic items is think of them as ways to unlock the world. So I think of a lot of classic video games that as you collect items, you get to go to more places within the world.
Yep.
And so certain magic items you can place in there, not so much to overpower your characters, but to give them the potential to travel to new places or go back to places that were previously unobtainable to them. And now they can get there. Now they can do these things.
In many campaigns, the Cloak of the Manta Ray is completely useless. But if your players are going to the Water Temple, it's a game-changing item.
So now the big question. How many magic items should we be giving to our party?
So this is where the Dungeons & Dragons rules themselves have very kind of flippant advice, which is you can give out as much or as little treasure as you want. And that's great, because you can. You can have a game where your players don't find any magic items whatsoever, and they'll be fine. The 5th edition rules make no assumption that they find any treasure at all. And while certain combat encounters against flying enemies or enemies with resistance to non-magical weapons will be a little more difficult for them, they won't necessarily be impossible as long as you have a balanced group.
Yeah, on the other side of this, I would say it's better to go lower than to go higher. Because if you give them too many magic items, you run into some problems with them being overpowered, which is something that you do need to be prepared for as a DM if you're doing this.
If you have a party that has every legendary magic item in the Dungeon Master's Guide, you could throw them up against Demogorgon, Tiamat, and Orcus all at the same time, and they're not going to break a sweat. And so many players fantasize about having like 3 legendary magic items. And while that's awesome in theory, in practice that might not be appropriate for your campaign, depending on the power level of the characters that you're capable with. So you really want to take honest stock of both the tone of your campaign world. Again, if you're playing in a high magic world like Eberron, go nuts. But if you're playing in a more measured world where magic is a little bit more special and rare, you might want to have that more measured approach to things. Where this really comes into play, I think for me, the bottom line is if you break down all these random tables, if you've done the math, and there's many members of the community that have done the math, and then finally Xanathar's Guide to Everything actually breaks it down for us. On average, in a typical heroic fantasy campaign, each player character will find at least 1 magic item of each rarity. They may find an additional major item of uncommon or rarity, and approximately 20 minor magical items.
Yeah, so this means that besides the minor magic items, you're really only getting about, 4 to 5 magic items throughout the campaign.
Yeah, which makes sense because you only have 3 attunement slots as a player character anyways, right? I think the biggest thing that requires a mindset change, particularly if you like playing video games, is this means that players aren't probably going to upgrade from a +1 item to a +2 item to a +3 item. They're going to find an item and keep it for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, for newer DMs, something that you want to avoid is what I call video game syndrome, which basically means in video games, it's all about loot. A lot of times, like if I play Diablo or things of that nature, it's all about finding better loot, tossing away my old magic items for new ones. In Dungeons and Dragons, you don't really want to think of it like that. Sometimes the magic item that you get very early on, it's something that you're going to be sticking with for the entire campaign, and that's really going to become a personalized item for you.
Yeah, in practice, if you keep to the rule of 1 magic item of each rarity per character, plus or minus 2, that means that the players, as a party, are going to find 1 magic item of major power about as often as they gain a level. I will usually make sure the players find 1 or 2 minor magical items every game session, like a potion or a scroll or something fun and quirky. And oftentimes this will be weighted in awkward ways. But one of the big habits that I've had to break of myself is the dragon horde scenario where here's 6 magic items coming at the party all at once. And I found actually more recently, you don't have to give out 6 magic items all at once for the players to feel really rewarded. It's a really hard habit to break because oftentimes as DMs, we want to make sure that everyone feels equal by giving everyone a magic item at the same time. And then what happens is then you end up either giving out all these items at once and then they never find anything for weeks and weeks and weeks, or you're giving out way too much at once.
If you can do this the right way, I actually remember we went on an entire quest just because we wanted our paladin to get a magic sword.
Yeah.
Because as a team, we wanted him to be more powerful. Mm-hmm. He had a cursed sword. He wanted to get rid of that, but then he had no magic item. And we were like, guys, let's go find this guy a magic sword.
Yeah.
And that became a quest for all of us to get involved in to get that 1 magic item.
And I think, too, if you look at storytelling, there are those moments where everyone gets a new magic item in some stories, but oftentimes authors will only have 1 item be the spotlight because that lets that item shine for a few moments. And rather than having everyone find a new item and all be competing for the spotlight to show off their new bling, awarding 1 item at a time and letting that player kind of be the star for the next game session actually makes it feel much, much more special.
One of the most common items that you'll be giving out are consumable items.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at the tables in Xanathar's Guide to Everything and break down the treasure tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, the rule is about 20 magic items per player character over the course, again, of a 1 to 20 campaign.
So that's pretty much 1 per level.
Yeah, and that includes healing potions. I actually think it's okay to break this limit for healing potions. And with minor quirky items like cute things like immovable rods or bags of holding, I don't usually count these against the limit. If you want my tip for actually breaking yourself of the giving your party piles and piles of healing potions, let them find a staff of healing, and then just stop giving out healing potions. Just full stop. Give it, like, look at the other types of potions to hand out. Use those instead. Give them scrolls. And then make healing potions something that the players can buy.
So, Monty, do you prefer to tailor the magic items to the characters or just using random?
I prefer to tailor the magic items to the campaign.
That's fair.
Yeah. I think that the world feels more real when the magic items make sense within the context of the story. That's why Dragon Slayer was in the Castle of Rest. Like, the Crown of Rest was in that castle. And that magic item was there because it made sense for it to be there.
That does bring some authenticity to finding those magic items. But I think it is also important to know your players as well.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to give like a staff of power in a campaign that doesn't have any spellcasters or something like that. You want to make sure that you know your characters and not just what they're playing, but also their personalities and the way they're choosing to play those characters. Because a magic item should be something that gets that player excited.
Yeah, especially when it's a very rare or legendary item that is a character-defining item. You want to think about like the relationships that like Link has with the Master Sword, or Thor has with his hammer, right? And your characters are going to look for those items to give them an iconic image, and you do want to be able to deliver on that, especially towards the higher levels of the campaign. But I do think that like I like magic items being part of the story and grounded in the reality of the world. So one thing that I really like to do is foreshadow that a magic item is coming by saying like, there's a legendary dragon horde, and in that horde is this magic item. It was so much more satisfying when it was then found and the players felt like they got to seek it out and they knew what to expect. And sometimes though, the unexpected is way more interesting. When John Toland walks around wearing the Crown of Rest, people are like, whoa, he's got the Crown of Rest, right? And people recognize that. And then also have those opportunities for the weird, quirky items like the ever-smoking bottle and the immovable rod, which who knows how these are actually going to be used in an encounter. Let's find out.
So what do you think about buying magic items?
I think that if you're going to run a high magic campaign, instead of having more magic items be found by the players, letting them buy one magic item of each rarity over the course of the 1 to 20 campaign is the perfect way to capture that medium. If each player character is then able to purchase a magic item, again, it makes it something that only happens once every couple of levels, which I find avoids the feeling of the magic item mart, where like every time they go to a major city. But if you are going to do that, you really want to have the people that are buying and selling magic items be memorable NPCs in their own right.
I absolutely love that one of our favorite NPCs, Eldor the Immense, has now become this guy with his caravan of magic items that's well protected, and that's also a key point.
Yeah.
You made it very clear that the kind of group of people that he's traveling with are much higher level than us, and if we try to rob him, we are going to die. Yeah,
I think that like the question of whether or not magic items are bought and sold in your campaign world says a lot about the politics and economics of your world, right? I like to think about magic items not like antiques, but like military grade weapons. And that means that they're things that politicians and rulers are really worried about, right? You and I can't go and buy a battle tank. We can't buy an F-16 fighter jet, right? But a paramilitary organization like a band of adventurers can. And when you hear about how that kind of organization is buying magical items, it makes all the people in the world get really on edge. Think about how worried we get about the notion of like nuclear weapons being who owns them in our own world. And I think that that's how the political forces in campaign worlds probably feel about magic weapons, right?
Especially the legendary ones.
Right. And so for me, Eldor the Immense, who buys and sells magic items, is really a character that's like Lockheed Martin or an arms dealer. He's on the fringes of the law, right? But people are still buying and selling from them because he's got a lot of power and influence because, hey, magic items might be dangerous, but they win wars.
So this has been our guide to awarding magic items in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We hope that you find some sweet loot.
Yeah, and of course, one thing we didn't touch on too much in this episode was actually crafting or creating your own homebrew magic items. If you're curious about this, we're thinking about covering it in a future video, and we'd love to know your thoughts and questions in the comments below.
Of course, we talked a lot about Xanathar's Guide to Everything. If you want to see some of the other things that are in that book, you can check out our reviews over here.
Now, of course, we bring you great DM tips every month, and you can check out our playlist of previous episodes right over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.